I don't even know where to start. There's no denying that Game of Thrones is probably the biggest show in the world right now. You have multiple fast-paced plot lines, you have complex and intriguing characters, you have huge set pieces, you have gargantuan action sequences, and you have a storyline that promised an epic conclusion. Well, at least it did. Now I know the avid fans of the show are gonna disagree with me, and I'm here to tell you, I too am an avid fan, and you are wrong. Obviously, major spoilers ahead for season 8. I'm going to try and not touch upon plot points from the last episode. But if anything, the last episode did emphasize a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about. Needless to say, these are my opinions, but I feel like they're really, really accurate. See, GOT has lost a lot of steam over its 8-year run. And in the last few seasons, especially season 8, the plot development and character development seems to have gone completely down the drain. There's even a petition out there to erase this season and just do it over. This descent into the unfortunate chamber of don't know how to end it shows like Lost and Dexter and How I Met Your Mother kinda started happening to Game of Thrones around season 5. And it's pretty simple to understand why. The show started exhausting George R.R. Martin's storylines and narrative techniques from the books they're based on, A Song of Ice and Fire. So the first thing you have to understand is the story in the books is told through the points of views of various characters. So Jon, Dany, Arya, Sansa, and all the major players get a few of these point of view chapters in each book. Through these POVs, you get into the mind of the character and understand them more intimately. Now, obviously, a show can't do that, but that's why you get people to develop a book to series. It's not just willy-nilly taking themes and characters without understanding and showcasing the motivations that drive them. Martin's narratives were strong, well-rounded, and most importantly, they made sense because he understood that the journey is just as important as the end. So every action a character made sense. It fulfilled their character arc or something to do with the overall story. Which is why in the first few seasons of the show, a lot of the characters seemed really well developed. They had motivations, they had drives, and they were doing things for a reason. But in the latter seasons, without the source material, Benioff and Weiss had to wing it. And wing it they did. Also, side note, the dialogue really went down the drain.
Who threatened you?
I'm not Ned Stark. I understand the way this game is played.
Ned Stark was a man of honor.
And I am not. Threaten me again, and I'll have you thrown into the sea.
I used to steal from people like you when I was a boy.
It's a good thing you're not a boy anymore. Because you have no
Yeah. So in my opinion, there are 3 major areas where Game of Thrones started to really show fatigue. You have uneven pacing, you have destruction of years of character development, and not enough setup for things that happened, as well as not enough closure for plot lines that should have been concluded. Okay. Here we go. We start off with uneven pacing. So this is a pretty simple one to understand. In the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, it took its time to lay out various plot lines based on the narrative it was trying to achieve. So this was done for 2 main reasons. One is to just introduce and get you familiar with the characters, and the second was to create and contain the mystery and intrigue of the show. And for the most part, I think they managed to do a pretty good job. The first few seasons were actually really good. And then we fast forward to season 8 where shit's happening faster than you would leave work on a Friday. The show literally jam-packs so much into an episode that everything seemed to be happening at a highly accelerated pace. Add to that the last 2 truncated seasons and you really should have had plot lines flowing into another season. Martin's pacing in the books and subsequently the first few seasons of Game of Thrones was clearly thought out and laid out for the narrative it was trying to achieve. Without it, the last season just seemed to have been tying up loose threads with what seems to have been the easiest and in most cases the fastest way to progress the story. And well, we all know how that ended. Okay, let's move on to destruction of years of character development. And whoo boy, I can spend an entire video talking about this. But I'll summarize it into one statement. Why the hell was there any character development in this show? Like I said, the show gave us amazing, complicated, intriguing characters. There were many years of highs and lows, learnings and unlearnings, moments of truth, trials that broke them. And then the creators were like, maybe, and then they threw it away in the last few episodes. Jaime grew so much. He was finally with Brienne, he was fighting on the side of the heroes. He transitioned into the character that he wanted to become. And then boom, weird move, goes back to Cersei, dies with her under the rubble. Speaking of Cersei, she was literally supposed to be the big bad of the show, or at least that's what the show was positioning her to be. In my head, there was no legit plot reason for Cersei to die the way she did. In my opinion, she should have gotten and rightfully deserved a fitting death. There was no doubt she was gonna die, but I mean, come on. A building collapses on her. Even Qui-Gon got better. In the last season, Lena Headey got relegated to like such a background character. I'm like, why are we even watching this anymore? She was Cersei Lannister. This entire thing is a classic case of not knowing what to do with your characters once you reach a certain point in the plot. There are too many loose threads, there are storylines that are happening all over the place, there are character arcs that haven't been fulfilled. And like, I get the narrative technique of red herrings, which is to mislead your audience into thinking one thing is gonna happen and something else happens, and that's like a shock and awe, twist value kind of thing. But if you have like 19 plot lines that you set up from day one, and now you come out and say they're all red herrings, we didn't actually plan to do that, then you're not really setting up a narrative technique. You're just doing a bunch of random shit for no reason. Which very nicely leads us to not enough setup for things to happen and not enough closure for plot lines that we were promised would get a fitting conclusion. Dany's storyline post Martin source material is just a complete mess. Yes, there is early evidence of the power going to Dany's head, and yes, there was set up in the first few seasons of her rage towards the Lannisters and everyone else in Westeros who questioned her power. And after everything she went through, the loss and the abuse and the betrayals and the torture, no one would really blame her for burning it all to the ground. Except the middle seasons kept emphasizing how her anger tempered through the course of her journey. She started showcasing more and more signs of a compassionate and forgiving ruler. And just honestly, the penultimate twist just seemed like a betrayal to the character she was developing into. Had there been more micro moments in season 8, or had they laid it out in this season and made another season where she goes full-blown Mad King? But the way they did it, it really didn't pan out. Because the setup, if there was any, wasn't structured enough to lead us to this conclusion. And again, it's not a twist if it doesn't make any sense. Speaking of season 8, a lot of people did like the Battle of Winterfell, but it was chock full of inconsistencies and plot lines they just decided to not tie up. It's been 7 seasons of setup of the Night King, his connection to Bran, their intertwined destinies, and then nothing. None of the questions about that was answered. Not to mention Arya killing him. Look, I admit it was a cool scene, it was really badass of Arya and stuff like that, but I refuse to admit that there was any setup that could push that out. It just wasn't. And they had room to set it up. But here's why she anyway shouldn't have been the one to kill the Night King. There's literally no story or character reason for Arya to have killed the Night King. And if there were, we should have seen more of it in the previous seasons, especially since they knew like 3 years ago.
For, God, I think it's probably 3 years now or something, we've known that it was going to be Arya.
Oh, come on! They had years to build on it, they just didn't. And they understand motivations for killing a character. I mean, Jon could have killed Ramsay, but he didn't. Sansa did. Because plot-wise, it added value. She was the one with the most connection to Ramsay, the most reason to kill him. We waited 7 years for a confrontation between the Night King and the protagonists. And then it was over in like a second for no actual narrative or character development. But for a goddamn shock and awe moment. And that, I'm sorry, that's just bad writing. And what happened to the Azor Ahai prophecy? They kept implying a character, Jon, Dany, Stannis at one point, would fulfill this prophecy. None of it happened. I mean, everything about Bran's storyline was just messed up towards the end. Everything that he had been saying all these seasons made no sense. What was the point of Jon being a Targaryen? Like, literally. Basically, Benioff and Weiss knew the end and they just got there however they could, without thinking of the implications that the journey had. They sacrificed character development, world building, and progression of story arcs. Look, since the TV show has surpassed the books, a lot of the book characters will end up where their TV counterparts did. But based on Martin's previous writing, I'm gonna take the bet that it's gonna make sense. Dany may very well burn them all. It's a great end to turn one of the 2 major protagonists into the big bad. It was never Cersei or the Night King that Westeros had to fear, it was Dany all along. But, like I said, and I'm not saying that the show didn't allude to it a couple of times, but I'm like, you alluded to it like 6 seasons ago, and then you never touched upon it ever again. But in the books, we would see all of it. We would understand why she was so insecure. We would understand the pain that she kept feeling because of the loss of loved ones and trusted advisors. We would see the pain of why she's doing it. We would see her become the villain in a very effortless and seamless way, and not because father was the Mad King. And we could have seen all of this in the show as well until Benioff and Weiss decided to Dracarys the entire thing to the ground.